Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to discuss all of the controversy over Taylor Swift's new Anti-Hero music video. So if you don't know, Taylor Swift released the first music video off of her new album, Midnights, on October 21st. The video talked about dealing with fame and insecurity and had a lot of references to her publicly discussed restrictive ED. And Taylor's also talked about in the past having her body publicly picked apart and shamed by the tabloids and the internet, and how that deeply affected her self-esteem and helped fuel her ED. And there were a lot of references to these topics made in the video visually and in the lyrics. But a single scene from this music video is where all of the controversy comes in, and it is this scene of Taylor standing on a scale with the word fat on it. And this single scene was enough to outrage the entire fat acceptance community on Twitter and TikTok in a big way. And today, we are going to look at why they are so upset about this scene.
Hey Taylor Swift, what the fuck, dude? Being fat is not a bad thing, and in 5 seconds of your music video, you have successfully reinforced the idea that it is. And believe me, I'm empathetic that she has had an eating disorder and struggles with her relationship with food and herself, but that does not give her permission to perpetuate a really harmful narrative. That is not a feeling, and feeling fat or fearing being fat or not liking the way you look, which is often what feeling fat actually is, does not mean that you deal with these systemic issues that actual fat people actually deal with. In 2010 to 2014, I was a counselor for teenage girls, and if this music video had come out then, and they would have seen their fucking idol standing on a scale, looking disappointed and disgusted with herself, and the word fat coming up, I can only imagine how hurt and disgusted with themselves so many of them would have been. And I'm sure there's a lot of people right now who are feeling that way. Like Taylor, you have fat fans. Did you consider them? It blows my mind that someone with this much power and influence, who's all about empowerment and all this bullshit, would do something so short-sighted and out of touch.
Whew, babes. We're starting out strong. So this woman gets to the gist of why people are mad about this shot of Taylor. She said that being fat is not a bad thing, and in 5 seconds, you reinforce the idea that it is. No, she didn't. She's giving her own anecdotal experience about how she felt in her body at a period of time. She didn't say anything or even imply that being fat was a bad thing in general. She was talking about herself. And Taylor Swift has countless lyrics and songs about her experiences, some positive, some negative, but they're all just her experiences. And the next section of this video, she said that just because you felt fat at some point, that doesn't mean you've dealt with the systemic issues fat people actually deal with. Where the f*** did she say that she did? Did you get the extended version of the song? Did you get the behind-the-scenes cut where she said she knows exactly what it's like to be fat? Because I sure as hell didn't. And the last part of the video is such a reach. She said that the shot is going to make young people feel bad about themselves. First of all, no. If anything, with Taylor's history of disordered eating and the rest of the context of the video, this shot is actually a stance against fatphobia and beauty standards. And second, it's not a celebrity's job to censor their experiences and tiptoe around other people's insecurities to protect their fans. If she felt unworthy at some point because she felt fat, that is her reality, and she is allowed to share that.
There's just something so funny about people trying to explain this imagery in Taylor Swift's video to me. It is not that I do not know what she is saying in that video. My issue is that she says, "I'm the problem, it's me," and then shows her shaming herself for being fat. It shows it as an individual issue rather than a systematic one, which it is.
Of course, she's framing this situation as a personal issue. It's her personal story. It's her song. Taylor Swift is known for telling stories mostly about her own life. So why, in this specific case, is she obligated to frame her own experience with her own body in a systemic manner?
It's reductive and it's irresponsible considering the level of platform she has. The impact goes deeper than any single person's experience. So to continue the narrative that it is your fault that you feel that way is really harmful.
Again, did you get the extended version of the song? Where does she say that it's her fault she feels a certain way about her body? And even if she did, who cares? It's her story. If that's how she feels, that's how she feels.
So a couple of things here. Number one is that I understand that Taylor Swift struggles with an eating disorder. Get it. Well, let me ask you a question. Why do we have to be so careful about the feelings of people who have eating disorders over the feelings of fat people? Like, when did having an eating disorder become an excuse for perpetuating fat phobia?
Taylor Swift did not perpetuate fat phobia in that video. And let's get some backstory in before we get any further. If you haven't existed on any ED internet spaces, or you're new to my channel, you may not know that it's becoming more and more common to say that fat phobia isn't just discrimination against fat people, which is what most people know fat phobia to be, but a lot of people are now saying that fat phobia also means not wanting to be fat. So simply saying, I don't want to gain weight, is you being fat phobic. Now, if that seems ludicrous to you, yeah, it should be. And when I say fat phobia in this video, I am talking about discriminatory behavior towards fat people, unless I specify otherwise. But this rise in people saying that fat phobia is simply not wanting to gain weight means that everyone with a restrictive ED would automatically be considered fat phobic, because part of having a restrictive ED is a fear of gaining weight. And to a lot of people, like the people I've shown in this video, that fear of gaining weight means you have a negative bias against fat people, which is why this screenshot alone could be considered fat phobia. But this new narrative that simply not wanting to gain weight means that you hate fat people is doing real harm to people who have restrictive EDs. One of my followers told me a story about getting support for their ED on the internet, and they said, I've been struggling with a restrictive binge cycle since I was about 14. So I went on an internet forum to try to get support for it. One day a YouTuber made a video about this forum, and let's just say it was full of negative points. So many of my friends and I got harassing DMs telling us to off ourselves, many threats of getting harmed, and so on. I have never ever considered posting something dehumanizing or mean to fat people. I was just connecting with other people and talking about my experiences. But yeah, I've been called fat phobic by so many people. When I confronted them, most of them said, you don't want to be fat, so you are fat phobic. So people are literally using the fear people with restrictive EDs have of gaining weight as an excuse to harass them for doing nothing except being afraid of gaining weight.
Like, whenever we talk about this on this app, that is the one thing that y'all always run to, is the fact that, oh my god, well, somebody has an eating disorder, so that, like, you can't say anything to them. No, actually, we can. Having an eating disorder does not give you a free pass to perpetuate fat phobia and anti-fat bias. Okay? Having body dysmorphia, which I would like to remind you, is not feeling like you are fat when you are not. But regardless, having body dysmorphia also does not excuse you from being fat phobic.
Just so we're clear, all of this is over Taylor standing on a scale that says fat. That's the egregious fat phobia she's talking about.
A lot of people are in these comments telling me, well, it's artistic expression. And there are so many other ways that Taylor could have described that without using fat as a negative term and showing it as her worst fear.
What if being fat is Taylor's worst fear? I don't know Taylor Swift, I don't know her life, but I do know a lot of people that struggle with restrictive EDs, and before recovery, being fat and gaining weight is their worst fear. But that fear doesn't come from a place of bigotry or hatred for fat people. They fixate on food and body size every second of every day because of a debilitating mental disorder. So even if being fat is someone's worst fear, they shouldn't be shamed for that. And shaming people for the symptoms of their disorder only makes it harder for people to cope with their disorder and harder to ask for and get help. So I have a restrictive ED. To me, the definition of fat phobia is the irrational fear of getting fat. And the key component of that is irrational. I can't control my thoughts, no matter how much I know that they're not rational. If I could, I would be free tomorrow. But I've been struggling a lot with this type of fat phobia. I think most people think if you have a restrictive ED, it starts with wanting to get skinnier. But for me, that's not true. I've been dealing with anxiety around eating for as long as I can remember. When I started getting bad episodes of PTSD and depression, I would cut down on food to regain control over my anxiety. It took me a few months to accept that I had developed an ED. I felt so ashamed, and most of that shame was because I was so deeply afraid of gaining weight. I wholeheartedly believe that there are people who truly dislike fat people, but not everything is fat phobia. I was so hesitant to admit to myself that I was scared of gaining weight because I felt like that would make me a bigot. Most of my friends are bigger than me, and I felt so bad. I felt like my friends would take it personally, that they would call me out for my fat phobia, that they would hate me for not wanting to look like them. I ended up telling them, and they didn't respond like that. But that fear of getting called fatphobic stopped me from getting help for many months, and made it to the point where I needed a lot of help and medication to even be able to eat one meal per week. It's such a complex disorder, and it ruins so many parts of your life. I would never hold any ill will to someone who struggles with this. But the climate that fat acceptance is creating is harming people with EDs by creating more stigma around an already very stigmatized disorder.
The fact of the matter is Taylor is not fat and has never been fat. And I understand that she has struggled with an ED, has struggled with her body image. I just struggled with that imagery.
You struggle with the imagery. You do. Why is that anyone's responsibility but your own? You're trying to hold someone else, a complete stranger, responsible for your feelings. How is that fair?
It's like people have so much sympathy for thin women who have eating disorders and yet don't share that same sympathy for fat people or even fat people who have eating disorders, because that happens.
All that talk about people have more sympathy for thin people with EDs than fat people. What does that have to do with Taylor's video? There was nothing in the video that referenced anything like that. That's a completely separate issue than what was portrayed in the video. So that's not a valid criticism of her video at all.
Let's talk about the Taylor Swift music video scene. For those of you who haven't seen it, the progression of the scene goes: Taylor Swift stands on a scale, it spins around, comes to the word fat. She then looks in the mirror, and her alter ego is pointing at her disappointingly, and she is looking defeated. Taylor Swift, like most celebrities, had and continues to have an awful relationship with tabloid media, because tabloid media is some of the most fatphobic trash that can exist on the planet. And ultimately, at the end of the day, this is Taylor Swift's story, and she gets to tell her relationship with the media tabloids in her body however she chooses. And for me, what really sucks about this scene in the music video is that there isn't a moment of breakthrough that gets depicted. So much of Taylor Swift's music that has been calling out tabloids and media coverage of her life and experiences is deeply critical of the harm that they do in perpetuating harmful and disgusting stereotypes about women onto women. One of the prime examples of that is the way in which media discourse around her body contributed to her eating disorder. And I think at the heart of what's hurting a lot of fat folks who love Taylor Swift is that instead of using her artistic expression to tear the awfulness of tabloids ever using anybody's body weight or size as a moral failing apart, what she's doing is telling the story that she found freedom in the fact that she's not fat. And what would have been truly special is if she participated in tearing the beauty standard down instead of finding freedom in her proximity to the beauty standard. And the reality for me at the end of the day is I've always found familiarity with Taylor Swift's music. So I guess to all of the fellow Swifties out there, before you so aggressively come to the defense of Taylor Swift in the comment sections of all of these fat and plus size people, I would ask that you just take a moment and hold space for what it must feel like for for all of these people to see in a Taylor Swift music video that is going to end up getting hundreds of millions of views, a reiteration that one of the worst things that could happen to Taylor Swift is that she actually be fat. And what gave all of those tabloid stories power over her was a fear of being fat, a fear of those things being true about her.
Let's start out by saying that the beginning of the video is true. The fixation of media on people's bodies can absolutely cause damage to people's self-esteem, and that is no different for Taylor Swift. But the conclusion that this person came to, that what was hurtful about the video is that she didn't use her platform to tear down the tabloids and instead found solace in her proximity to the beauty standard, is not the obvious conclusion of what the video portrayed. That's certainly one interpretation of the video, but that's definitely not the one I or most people would come to. There's no indication in the video that there was any major resolution to the insecurity that was spoken about in the song. So I'd say it's a huge reach to say that the conclusion came by her clinging to the beauty standard and the fact that she's not fat. And even if that was the conclusion of the video, there's nothing wrong with that. That would be her story, and she can tell it. And artists aren't required to make political messages in their music. And also, Taylor Swift's battle with her ED isn't political. It's personal. This video and this song were very personal. So while there may have been external factors that contributed to her body image issues and her ED, it's safe to say that the recovery process was mostly done internally. So it makes a lot of sense for the resolution of a video about her own insecurities and her own struggle with an ED to not be political. And the section at the end where she says that people should hold space for all of the fat people that might have been hurt by Taylor's video. Yes, there are absolutely people who were hurt by the video, and they are allowed to feel however they want. But there's a huge difference between saying, I'm hurt by Taylor Swift's video because it brought up a lot of my own insecurities, and what I've seen across Twitter and TikTok of people calling her fatphobic and bigoted because of this music video. The difference between the two is one of them is taking responsibility for your own feelings about the situation, and the other one is blaming other people for how you feel. I and anyone else can feel sympathy for the negative emotions that this video may have brought up for you, but those feelings aren't Taylor's or anybody else's fault. They are yours to deal with. All of the Taylor Swift fans that are upset about all of this drama aren't mad because people were hurt. They're mad because people are blaming Taylor Swift and calling her fatphobic for telling her own personal experience with her body.
Taylor Swift's new music video, she has an imagery that directly contributes to anti-fatness. There's a moment where she's in the bathroom with what can be visualized as her inner critic, and she steps onto a scale and it goes to the max weight and it says fat in big capital letters, and there's this kind of like moment of disgust and critique. I think what she's trying to visually communicate is her struggle with beauty standards and body image, which so many of us can relate to. There are 7 bazillion ways that she could have communicated that without contributing to anti-fatness. And some of you might be saying, Angelina, is it really that serious? Is her stepping on a scale really that big of a deal? And is it really contributing to fat phobia? And the simple answer is yes, it is. Taylor Swift has millions of people who tune in to watch her music videos. And many of those people are in the adolescent age range. And through lots of different scientific studies, it has been proven that during adolescence, that is usually when eating disorders are established and body image issues are at their highest or kind of getting rooted at the beginning stages. So that is her responsibility to consider what kind of messaging is she showing to her audience? What is she trying to say? And I want to know, like, are there any fat people on your team who like you talked this through with? And if not, hi, I'm happy to be your designated fatty if that comes along with the fat check. You know what I'm saying, Taylor Swift?
Nope. I think it's pretty gross to make the implication that a celebrity being open about their body image issues and ED is going to cause a bunch of EDs in children and then try to ask for a job to fix the problem. It feels pretty tactless, and it still isn't Taylor Swift's job to censor herself for her young audience. Hell, there's a song on this album with the S word in the title. And to be clear, I don't care that she has a swear word in the title of one of her songs, but if you are worried about the children, then it makes way more sense to be outraged over that than this video. And this TikToker said that Taylor Swift's video will contribute to anti-fat bias because it would cause EDs in young, impressionable people. Do you get what that means? She's saying that the video contributes to fatphobia because it could cause an increase in restrictive EDs. But if you want to say that this video will increase insecurities in young girls, which I very much disagree with, then you can say that. But restrictive EDs and body image issues aren't fatphobic. They are not discriminatory towards fat people. She is outright saying that a rise in people with restrictive EDs means a rise in people being fatphobic towards her, which is why she's saying, why don't you want to look like me? But there needs to be a clear separation between how someone feels about their own bodies and how someone feels about other people's bodies. A bunch of people having a restrictive ED that makes them fear gaining weight doesn't mean that person dislikes fat people or has bad opinions of fat people. But that's the exact opposite of what this woman is saying. She's saying more EDs in young girls means more discrimination towards her for being fat. Because to her, however you feel about your own body is exactly what you feel for everyone else. But this idea that not wanting to be fat or not wanting to gain weight is fatphobia not only prevents people from being honest about their own feelings about their body for a fear of being called discriminatory, like all the people in this video are trying to do to Taylor Swift right now, but it also leads to more stigmatization of restrictive EDs. If people don't feel open talking about their problems, it just leads to more isolation and more marginalization for people who may be really struggling. I have an ED, so I've lost a bunch of weight. I confided in a close friend about it, and she told me that losing weight intentionally was inherently fatphobic and it oppresses people who are overweight. She literally assumed that I had an ED just to fit a beauty standard and berated me about, what about people who are overweight like me? Why are you so afraid to look like me? I haven't really confided in anyone about my ED since. That experience kind of ruined it for me. If you believe that having an ED that causes someone to fear weight gain is discriminatory or bigoted in any way, you are part of the reason that this woman and so many others don't ask for help and suffer in the depths of their ED for far longer than necessary. The reality of restrictive EDs is that there are a lot of people who genuinely fear being fat. And that is very much something Taylor Swift herself may have experienced. And that symptom of their disorder should not be shamed or stigmatized or labeled as discriminatory. That's like shaming someone for feeling guilt when they have depression, or having delusions if they are bipolar, or having hallucinations if they're schizophrenic. Most people already have enough shame around their disorder. They don't need to constantly feel like their disorder makes them a bigot.
And I have a lot of things to say to the commenters, a lot of the commenters on that post, and just a lot of people in general. One thing I have to say is, of course, I know that every single person who lives in a society with beauty standards experiences body image issues, insecurities, hateful feelings towards their body. Everyone does, because that's the point of fat phobia. And the sooner we recognize that fat phobia impacts all of us negatively, the more we will fight together with fat folks who are pushing for fat liberation. But what happens is that thin people typically put up their defenses when a moment like this happens, and we call out that you can have body image issues, you can talk about having body dysmorphia without using fat as the butt of the joke, without being like, well, the reason why I feel bad about myself is because I feel fat. The reason why I feel bad about myself is because I think I'm fat. And it's like, okay, well, what are you trying to say to those of us who are fat? Hi, I'm fat.
I'm going to say this one thing, and it should be internalized by everyone who is offended by the Taylor Swift video. This video was not about you. Nothing in this video referenced you. Countless people are like, well, if Taylor Swift herself doesn't like being fat, what does she think of me? Nothing. Her fears in her own body have nothing to do with you. This song was about her own insecurities, so think of it like a diary. These are her own internal thoughts, and they have nothing to do with her perception of you. And then there's this entire section about how Taylor never experienced life as a fat person, which she never said she did, and how a lot of fat people were triggered by her video. Again, not Taylor's fault. If you felt hurt by the video, that is a valid response. But it's not her responsibility to apologize for making you feel that way. It just isn't. You are responsible for your own triggers. For example, I personally have a huge fear of needles. I pass out almost every time I get a shot. And recently I was at a friend's house and there was this drug documentary playing on the TV when I walked in, and the people were using needles. And my anxiety shot through the roof. I started heavy breathing, I started to get lightheaded, I thought I was going to pass out. But all I did was ask them to turn off the TV and sat down on the couch and took some deep breaths. I told my friend about what the problem was and they were like, oh, I didn't know. And they just sat with me on the couch for a few minutes while I took some deep breaths. And after I felt fine, we moved on. My response to that situation was valid. But I can also acknowledge that in that situation, it's nobody's fault for my anxiety except my own. It's not my friend's fault for having needles on their TV. It's my problem, and I have to deal with it. And in the case of Taylor's music video, you can feel whatever way you want about it. But those feelings are your responsibility, and yours alone. And this TikToker also said that as soon as we recognize that fatphobia hurts everyone, we can fight against it. But the Taylor Swift video did make a stance against fatphobia and beauty standards. This scene clearly depicts fatphobia and beauty standards in a bad way, and how they affected Taylor's inner critic of herself. So that is recognizing that fatphobia is a bad thing. This wasn't a stance for fatphobia at all. She goes on and on about all the ways that fatphobia affects her as a fat person, and Taylor in the video clearly shows how fatphobia affects her as a thin person. So I think this video did exactly what this TikToker is criticizing Taylor Swift for not doing. And also, countless critiques I've seen of Taylor's video have said that it wasn't okay because she's not fat and she doesn't know the fat experience. So if fatphobia does affect everyone, including thin people, how are thin people supposed to say that? How are they supposed to show that if they're not allowed to talk about fat in any negative way unless they're fat? It doesn't make sense.
So that is a screen grab from Taylor Swift's Anti-Hero music video where she gets on a scale and the scale just says fat. Literally the last video I made was about how thin people's self-applied fat phobia is still problematic, and this is why. So clearly Taylor is talking about insecurities that she has had around her weight, and I do know that she's an eating disorder survivor, which is what a lot of thin people and some fat people are using to defend her. But it's so interesting to me how people only care about people with eating disorders when the person with the eating disorder is thin. Because as a fat person with an eating disorder, this imagery is incredibly damaging. Anything that associates the word fat with something negative is very damaging. I went through treatment hearing things like, I feel fat, always from thin people who will never understand what it's like to actually be treated as a fat person in this society. Now, I love Taylor Swift, so Swifties, please don't come for me. This is not meant to be a jab or a dig at her. This is meant to be an open dialogue about problematic fatphobic behavior. And this is also meant to be a discussion about how celebrities and people with larger platforms have a responsibility to utilize those platforms in a way that reduces harm in whatever way possible. There are ways to talk about self-applied fat phobia and insecurities around body size without being openly traumatizing to fat people. But the imagery that Taylor used in her latest video is not one of them. Now, I've actually been really getting into Taylor Swift lately and resonating with her music. And it's really damaging for me to listen to her music and watch her videos knowing that one of her biggest fears is looking like me. Now, as a fat person, like, our biggest fears around our bodies are being unalived from treatable and preventable illnesses simply because doctors don't listen to us, or not being able to find jobs or well-paying jobs because of our body size, not being able to find clothes to wear to the jobs that we are able to secure, and the list goes on and on and on. But thin people's biggest fear surrounding their body size is looking like us, not experiencing the things that we experience, but just looking like us. And while I understand that these fears are valid and need to be spoken about, they need to be spoken about responsibly. Because fat phobia is trauma.
So we're back to that weird talking point of, if Taylor doesn't want to be fat, then she doesn't like that I'm fat. She still doesn't care about you. And if knowing that some celebrity or any random person doesn't want to be fat really does traumatize you, go to therapy. Go to some sort of treatment. Get the help you need to deal with that, because it's not other people's jobs to constantly censor themselves and tiptoe around your own traumas. And I'm sure there are a lot of people, thin people with restrictive EDs, that watched this portion of Taylor's video, and it brought back a lot of bad memories of standing on scales, of self-loathing, of late nights feeling cold and empty and scared. But that still isn't Taylor's fault. And you don't see a bunch of thin people in recovery making TikTok after TikTok about how Taylor Swift reminded them of their past ED behavior. Because she isn't responsible for those feelings. She's telling her story. As sad and triggering and traumatic as this video may have been for you, it may have been just as traumatic for millions of other thin people with restrictive EDs out there. And it may have been just as traumatic for Taylor to live through all of those experiences that brought her to make this video. Why isn't that being talked about? Why is it only people in the fat acceptance community that are outraged over this? And at the beginning of this video, she mentioned that there are a bunch of thin people that get taken more seriously when it comes to EDs than fat people. And multiple of the TikToks in this video have basically said the same thing. And all of this just feels like resentment towards thin people. There is nothing in Taylor's video that says or implies that she knows what it's like to be fat, or that she's speaking on behalf of anyone but herself. So all of this talk of, she doesn't know what it's like to be fat, just reeks of resentment and jealousy. And that definitely squares with the next section of the video, when she talks about how thin people don't understand how not finding clothes or jobs and other things are so much of a struggle for fat people, and how hurtful it is to not want to be fat. If we accept that all of those struggles she mentioned are real, why wouldn't someone be afraid of being fat? Like, if you do get treated so poorly and you were traumatized by all of these experiences, why is it offensive for someone to be like, oh, you go on and on about how badly you're treated on a daily basis, I don't want to be treated badly, so I don't want to be fat. That's a perfectly reasonable conclusion to come to, and I don't understand why that would be offensive. And still, none of this has anything to do with Taylor's video. The specifics of what she felt about the scale and being fat, beyond sadness and disappointment, wasn't specified in the video. So any talk about why she didn't want to be fat is just speculation. And also, Taylor Swift is known for being a relatable musician. So if you felt a strong emotion after seeing that video because you saw the word fat being used in a negative way, then the scene still evoked past experiences in some way. It may have been a negative feeling, just like listening to a breakup song might bring up negative emotions, but it still caused you to feel something. So even if you're fat and Taylor's skinny, and you may not have had all of the same life experiences and associations with the word fat, the scene is still clearly relatable. Why not just take that from the video? That people of all sizes have strong feelings and associations with the word fat. Why does it have to be, she doesn't know the real fat experiences, so she can't use the word, or why doesn't she want to look like me? Just take it as a relatable scene about insecurity and body image and leave it at that. The overall message of these TikToks about Taylor's music video and her usage of the word fat is, how dare you verbalize your insecurities because they offend me? But it's nobody's right to tell another person what insecurities can and cannot be expressed and in what ways. And nobody is responsible for your insecurities but you. All of this Taylor Swift drama is the first time this strong undercurrent of hatred towards people with restrictive EDs has really hit the mainstream in a big way. But this hatred has been brewing under the surface of the fat acceptance and fat liberation and haze movements for a while now. It didn't come out of nowhere. I've struggled with a restrictive ED for about 8 years now. I have a friend I've known since birth. We do everything together, and she's always the first person I share everything with. She's been morbidly obese since childhood, while I've always ranged from the healthy weight range to underweight. Recently, I've noticed by the way she talks that she's fallen down the fat acceptance pipeline. I knew nothing about the community before, but when I stumbled onto it on TikTok, suddenly a lot of our tense hangouts started to make more sense. She's extremely preachy and aggressive. I love her, and she's my best friend, so I don't argue or bring up anything to do with my experiences anymore. She talks about fat oppression almost every time we hang out, and it's hard to have fun anywhere without her bringing body size up. Like, we go to a movie, there's no fat representation. We go shopping, there's no cute clothes in her size. We go to restaurants, people must be judging her for ordering a lot of food. You get the point. And she does believe that those with restrictive EDs are fatphobic. She's brought it up several times without really clarifying if I'm part of the problem or not. But she seems to think that all EDs are restrictive. Like, she clearly has binge ED, but she can't acknowledge that she has binge ED. But my ED gives me a sense of control. I've lost all close family members and was also assaulted within the last 18 months. I relapsed hard to cope. I wish I could talk about my relapse, but I've kept it to myself for a fear of being judged and being called fatphobic. Sometimes she'll complain that because I eat just as much as she does when we're together, it proves that body size is out of anyone's control. I just don't like that she uses my disorder as proof to validate her worldview. According to her, any attempts that could be made to lose weight would just make her as disordered as I am, which really hurts. But maybe I'm just being overly sensitive? I don't know. She also aggressively puts me in my place if I slip up and say something she deems fatphobic, like, wow, this is a lot of food, or saying something isn't flattering on my body because the very concept of flattering is fatphobic. Both of us love fashion and thrifting. There was an instance that really hurt my feelings when she implied that the only reason I get more compliments on my outfits than her is because I'm skinny. Both of us get complimented equally, so I don't know why she felt the need to put me down. It's hard to put into words without oversharing, but essentially, I feel like I've lost my best friend. This has become the majority of what she talks about, and it's exhausting. I'm always nervous that I'm going to say the wrong thing and be told off for it. My own experiences with my body image are triggering to her, but her judginess about the clothes I wear, as well as shaming me into eating as much as she does when we go out, makes things tense and awkward. She thinks that getting me to overeat is helping with my recovery, when really it's making things worse. I dread eating around her, and it further distorts my perception of what a normal amount of food to eat is. I'll give you an example from a few days ago of what she says is a normal amount of food to eat in one sitting. A burger, 10-piece nuggets, large fry, and a soda, followed not 20 minutes later by banana bread that we made together, and then a bag of popcorn with several candies while we watch a movie, and then cheese and crackers since we watched Wallace and Gromit. That's a pretty average hangout for us, and I'm tired of me turning down snacks being framed as my ED keeping me from having fun. I just don't think either of us are good for each other. I clearly trigger her, and she triggers me. I don't want to lose her over something so stupid, but every hangout forces me to think more than I already do about my body and food. Our opposite eating habits had never been a problem in our friendship when we were younger. I just wish we could go back to those days. The fat acceptance community will claim that all of the outrage over the Taylor Swift anti-hero music video is about protecting fat people and stopping fat oppression, when in reality, it's a roundabout way of shaming people for simply having a restrictive ED and gatekeeping who gets to talk about their insecurities publicly. More specifically, it reinforces the idea that thin women shouldn't be able to openly talk about their insecurities or restrictive EDs. But it's a harmful narrative that not only continues to stigmatize restrictive EDs, but it also prevents the people in the fat acceptance community from finding healthy ways to cope with their insecurities, the ones that are causing them to call a mental disorder discriminatory towards them. I get stories like the one I just read on a regular basis of people having lost friends or family members because many people believe that simply having a restrictive ED means that you hate fat people. So this narrative is ruining lives. And not just for the people with restrictive EDs, but also for the people in the fat acceptance community that are spreading this misinformation. Because making other people responsible for your own feelings and your own insecurities about your body, like is being done with the Taylor Swift situation, or in the last story I read, it prevents those people from being able to reflect and find healthy ways of coping with their own insecurities, because they're blaming everyone else for how they feel. So this narrative that people not wanting to be fat means that they hate fat people harms all involved. And before I end this video, I want to say one more thing. I've focused this video mostly around people with restrictive EDs, but I don't want anyone to come away from this video thinking, okay, I guess it's fine if people with restrictive EDs talk about their body insecurities, but only if you have a restrictive ED. No, we're not going to gatekeep who gets to talk about their insecurities based on who has a diagnosed disorder. We're not going to do that. Everything I said in this video applies to everyone of all body sizes, regardless of whether you have a diagnosed disorder or not. I just focused on restrictive EDs because those are the people most harmed by this narrative that having a mental disorder makes you discriminatory. But that's it. That's the end of the video. It's really sad to see all of this outrage over something so innocuous, but here we are. I hope you enjoyed the video, or at least it was informative, and I hope to see you in my next video.